Okay, this is lesson 20 in a series of lectures on how the USA is starting a new Cold War with Russia. Alright? And we've been talking about how a big part of this new Cold War is the perception that's being manufactured that Russia is intent on conquering to the West, capturing European nations to rebuild its glorious empire. Well, I'm saying that's total crock, right? Russia lacks the military potential. And the first thing I showed you was Chechnya, how Russia couldn't even fight a tiny province within its own territory, right? Here's Russia. Inside Russia, there's a little province called Chechnya, right there. Blown up view, it's tiny still in a blown up view. Right? Russia lost the first war against Chechnya. And then it took 10 years to sufficiently subdue Chechnya in a second war. Alright? So today we're going to look at Russia's poor military performance in Georgia. Alright? A tiny country on its southern border, right near Chechnya, right there. Alright? Russia had trouble in its war against Georgia. Alright? So, on August 7th of 2008, Russian forces invaded Georgia. Okay? In the USA, this was portrayed as naked Russian aggression. However, Russia wasn't initiating. Russia was reacting. An invasion wasn't offensive. It was defensive. Russia wasn't trying to gain anything. Russia was trying not to lose a big chunk of its economy, namely gas sales to Europe. The USA instigated this incident. They started this by jamming Russia with the threat of NATO expansion into Ukraine and Georgia. Two nations linked together in regards to Russian gas sales to Europe. It's no accident that the USA packaged Ukraine and Georgia together to get them both into NATO. And that's a severe threat to Russia. Alright? It wasn't like they threw darts, at a world map on the wall. Alright? And it just so happened one landed on Ukraine, one landed on Georgia. Right? A blindfolded person throwing darts. Alright. So here's a little background to what happened. Now, 80% of Russian gas sales to Europe passes through Ukraine. All right, there's Ukraine right there. All right, gas comes down here from Siberia, Ukraine. All right, and Ukraine had been screwing Russia in multiple ways. With one, gas theft. They were diverting and stealing gas. Two, non-payment for purchased gas. Three, big and rising bills for unpaid for gas. And four, contract violations. Now, Russia's only recourse was to cut off gas for 3 days in January 2006 and reduce gas flow for 3 days in October 2007. This only screwed Russia by one, lost revenue. For 3 days they're not making money. Two, bad business threatening Europe energy security because they'll look elsewhere for energy. They'll develop alternative sources of energy. If they can't trust Russian energy, right, Russian gas for their energy, which is the lifeblood of their economy, right? Without energy, your economy doesn't run, right? They're going to look elsewhere. They're going to develop something else. Other gas sources, other energy sources. And that's why Russia only cut gas for 3 days at a time. This whole idea that Russia, holds like hegemonic leverage over Europe is a total joke. Only a simple-minded idiot would think that. All right? Russia threatens its own gas sales if they do that. All right. And this proved true. For in response to this energy security threat, Europe and USA pushed development of Shah Deniz gas that would pass through Georgia. And they pushed this publicly 7 times. 7 big public statements. to the Georgia crisis in August of 2008. All right. So the Shah Deniz gas field is right about there in the Caspian Sea. All right. Now, a little bit of history. Back in March of 2005, Russia accused Ukraine of gas theft at all. You know, the whole thing. Non-payment, big bills, contract violations. All right. And then in January 2006, Russia responded by cutting off gas to Ukraine for 3 days. 3 days only. And then in 2007, in response to Ukraine's high unpaid debt, Russia reduced gas flow through Ukraine, which again threatened Europe's energy security. Now, the Europeans aren't just going to sit on their asses passive, right? If they can't trust Russian gas supply, right, which is critical for their economy, they'll develop alternatives. And so 7 times Europe and the USA pushed for 3 non-Russian gas pipelines, all of which run through Georgia. That's how Ukraine and Georgia are linked. Russian gas, non-Russian gas. Russian gas, competition gas. Right? And Trans-Caspian Pipeline, Trans-Anatolian, White Stream. And you can include in there the Baku, Tbilisi, Sayan pipeline too. Right. So here's the pipelines. Right. First one they're talking about is Turkmenistan gas. There's Turkmenistan gas. All right. And Turkmenistan is the 6th largest natural gas reserves in the world. And to get that to Europe, you got to go across the Caspian. So this is the Trans-Caspian pipeline. It goes to Azerbaijan, then to Georgia, and from there it would go either the White Stream, Trans-Anatolian, or down through Baku, Tbilisi, and Sayan pipeline here. Okay, now, so yeah, that's one alternative. Another route is a Trans-Anatolian going across Turkey, and the White Stream would either go cut straight through to your Romania, or it would cut up through Ukraine. Ukrainians wanted to cut up through here so they can make money off this gas, through Crimea and then through Ukraine, then on to Europe. All right. Okay, so where was I here? Yeah, right. And then what happened is, so 7 times they're pushing. All right. So the background is Ukraine is screwing Russia. Europe is now pushing for alternative gas, right? Going through Georgia. And then in February 14th of 2008, the U.S. Senate passed a congressional resolution 439 for Georgia and Ukraine to join NATO, right? Again, you know, was this like a random selection? Did they just randomly pick Georgia and Ukraine? Hell no. All right? These are packaged together. This is a packaged threat to Russia. And then on April 1st, the House passed a similar resolution, 997. Ukraine and Georgia join NATO. And then Bush announces he strongly supports Ukraine and Georgia MAP. That's accelerated membership into NATO. And he said, with no trade-offs, period. Right? And then on April 16th, just 2 weeks later, Putin signs a formal decree establishing direct ties between Russia and South Ossetia. Right? So this is Putin's move here. Right? I'll explain it. He's setting up a move here. All right. And what this is, right, South Ossetia, let's see here. I got a map picture here. All right, here's South Ossetia right here in blue. This is Georgia. All right. So South Ossetia is a province within Georgia. Right. Right. You don't go and make a treaty. He's recognizing formal ties with South Ossetia. That's recognizing essentially a treaty with a province within another country. That's recognizing South Ossetian independence. He's giving de facto backing for South Ossetia independence. Right? He's signaling he's going to back their independence move. And then Russia makes military preparations. And then August 1st, South Ossetia initiates military actions for independence by shelling Georgian villages. So let's see here. So they're starting shelling villages in Georgia. Okay. All right. Now Georgia's got to respond to that, right? They just can't sit there and get attacked. So they send in military forces on August 7th. It took them a while. It took them 7 days to respond. Right? They send military forces into South Ossetia on a broad front, but focused on whatever. This is their capital of South Ossetia. Right? All right. So these are the Georgian forces in red. The arrows going in there. That's a broad front. And their capital is focused here. So they're kind of converging there. All right. Now, next day, Putin used Georgia's military occupation of South Ossetia as a pretext to invade, right? Saying, oh, we got to insert peacekeeping troops. All bullshit, right? In order to get, but he did this in order to get Georgia guarantee not to join NATO, all right? Now, upon obtaining Georgian president's guarantee not to join NATO, Russia begins troop withdrawal on August 18th. After only 11 days and without seizing the Baku pipelines, right? So he didn't stay and didn't seize the pipelines. That's a total defensive move. All they got was a guarantee not to join NATO, right? So again, Putin wasn't trying to gain something. He was trying not to lose, right? And the U.S. instigated this whole thing by threatening NATO expansion to Ukraine, which was screwing Russia on gas at the time, and Georgia, which is the route for non-Russian competitive gas. All right? So I used a joke here, 51st Dates, a movie, the analogy. Let me pull this up here.
Easy on a lady. Hey, I'm a person, not a seal, huh?
Well, I am a vet, not a doctor, so just hold still and I won't give you a treat. I know.
Ow.
Okay, you see that, kid? You see what happens when you play with sharks?
Now why you gotta spread those lies? Sharks are like dogs. They only bite when you touch their private parts.
Okay.
Hey, that's a good title for my documentary. Sharks. They only bite when you touch their private parts.
Alright. So, Putin, he's like a dog. He only bites when you touch his private parts. Well, we're jamming him in the private parts. Right? That's a clear threat to Russia. So what I say is Putin was tricky. Right? I mean, if you look at what he did the exact same maneuver that the British and French did in the 1956 Suez Crisis. Right? So, to show you kind of what goes on here, it involved Israel and Egypt. This is the Sinai desert here. And here's the Suez Canal. All right? So, after World War II, Britain and France were the last two big colonial powers who had possessions around the world. Right? I mean, there are a few others, like Dutch still had it, Belgium still had some stuff, right? Whatever, right? But they're the two big ones. Now, in 1956, President Nasser of Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal, seizing it from British and French ownership. All right, so here's Nasser. Now, if Britain and France did not fight this, if they just sat on their ass and did nothing, it would set a precedent to be copied by British and French colonial possessions around the world, setting off a massive jailbreak, too big to stop. So all the possessions around the world will say, oh, what the hell, they did it. Why not us? All right? And then you get something like Spain in 1810, Remember the Peninsula War began. When did that begin? Like 1808, I guess it was, or so. Well, Napoleon invades Spain. All right, Spain's getting its ass kicked by Napoleon. So all the Spain's American colonies break free. Every damn one of them. Right? It's a jailbreak, and they can't stop it. It'd be the same thing. You gotta nip it in the bud. First one that tries it, you gotta try to stop. Otherwise, if you let it go without any resistance, everyone else is gonna try, and then you're gonna have something too big for you to stop. All right. Hopefully you understand that. So Britain and France got what they did is Britain and France got Israel to attack Egypt across Sinai. Right. And once the conflict was underway, Britain and France used that as a pretext to insert peacekeeping forces. Right? Now, were they really peacekeeping forces? Hell no. Right? They went straight for the canal and seized control of the canal. Right? It was all a setup. Right? Israel got what they wanted out of it, and Britain and France got out. Right? It was total collusion there. Now, Putin did the same thing. Right? He offers South Ossetia backing for independence. They make their move for independence. Right? As soon as Putin knows that Georgia's going to have to respond. And as soon as they respond with military forces, he's going to use that as a pretext to invade. All right? All right, so Putin did a tricky move. But the thing about it was, Putin wasn't initiating. The U.S. initiated this whole thing. Putin wasn't trying to aggressively expand and take something. He's trying to defend against NATO expansion. Right? He backed out. Right? Didn't take the pipelines. You know, I think I have a map here. Well, let's see, where's that map? Oh, yeah. Okay. These are pipelines going through. He didn't seize the pipelines. Gas and oil pipelines. Right? So, by invading Georgia, I believe Putin killed two birds with the same stone. Right? Choosing the easier stone because invading Georgia was much easier than invading Ukraine. Yet it no less sent a warning to Ukraine not to join NATO. Right? Invading Ukraine would be problematic. Ukraine's got, you know, a more substantial military. It's probably crap, but it's more substantial than Georgia. You know, Georgia's got next to squat. And Ukraine's a big territory. It'd be a difficult proposition there. Now, was a U.S. NATO push fair play in terms of free market business competition? Oh, hell no. This was political military involvement, pushing NATO expansion, which is the sort of thing that in the past has led to economic nationalism and then has led to wars, right? USA jammed Russia with a big threat. Ukraine and Georgia joining NATO, right? That's a gas threat to Russia, encouraging even more Ukraine bad behavior. Remember, they're stealing gas, not paying for their gas, big bills building up, and contract violations. And then they're supporting backing non-Russian gas at the same time. That's how Ukraine and Georgia are linked. And then NATO on Russian doorstep. All right. So, well, for example, you know, the whole border between Ukraine and Russia. Here's Russia in yellow, right? Through Crimea, right? And in Georgia, right? You're pushing NATO right on its border again. Two places. Okay? And fourth, if Ukraine were to join NATO, that would almost certainly result in the loss of Russian military bases in Crimea. I mean, think about it, right? What's the sole purpose for NATO? To defend against Russia, right? So in what conceivable way will a NATO country allow Russian bases within that country? Right? I mean, you know, it's like, how does that happen? So the most strategic point in the Black Sea is Crimea. which is vital to protect both undersea pipelines and waterborne commerce. Commerce coming across here, east-west traffic, both ways, and pipelines. Remember that Russia has the Blue Stream coming down here to Turkey. They have two Turk Stream coming here to Turkey over here. All right, cutting across here. All right. Now keep in mind that Russia is a landlocked nation except for 3 sea routes. I mean, Russia's a big country, but it's landlocked. You can't trust its northern, Arctic stuff because that freezes over. They got Murmansk, they got St. Petersburg, right? And they got Black Sea here. Each of these are highly vulnerable to being cut off, right? It looks wide, but it's still a choke point. It's called the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap. All right, this is even more constrained, having to go through the Cataract Straits here. And then you got Black Sea here. It's got to go through Bosphorus and Dardanelles, right? And Crimea is the most strategic point here, all right? Now, this was known throughout history. So due to its obvious strategic value, Crimea was the object of conquest for the Greeks, Romans, Byzantium, Ottomans, Russia, Britain, France, and Nazi Germany during World War II. They all fought to control Crimea. And that's where the bulk of Russian military bases are in Crimea. They lose Ukraine, they lose Crimea. Right? Alright, we talked about this before. So you should remember. Now, Crimea is strategic to the Black Sea, just like Italy was strategic to the Mediterranean. Centrally located, protruding out into the sea, right? It dominates and controls east-west traffic. So somewhat analogous to Italy holding the dominant strategic position in the Mediterranean Sea. Now, Admiral Mahan, he stated this, in his analogy between the Mediterranean Caribbean. He said Italy would dominate the central Mediterranean if not for Malta. All right, so now I want to talk about Russian military performance during this war and how piss poor it was. All right, so after Russia fought ineffectively in 2 Chechen wars, in which they lost the first war, as you recall, and they took 10 years to successfully conclude the second war, they again fought poorly in the Georgian War, with glaring deficiencies that included poor air power ground support, failure of coordination and communication between forces, resulted in, among other things, in poor air support for ground forces and friendly fire incidents, failure of command and control, lack of intelligence and reconnoitering of Georgian forces, particularly artillery units, lack of indirect sighting target capability for weapons, and few smart weapons, few guided weapons. They had vehicle breakdown with severely limited repairability, and that hampered logistical support. They used old, broken down equipment and tanks, 1960s era. I guess I'll explain why. My speculation is why they used T-62s, T-72s, when they had T-80s, and I mean, there's not that many T-90s, but they got T-90s, right? Why did they use older ones? Well, I'll speculate on that later. Down here. Okay, this is just going to be my guess. I'm just telling you right now, this is just my guess. But they used T-62s and T-72s, older tanks. All right, so Russia's poor military performance in the Georgian War, both reconnaissance and timely intelligence, were very poor for both ground and air forces. Complete lack of intelligence on Georgian artillery positions resulted in several costly ambushes. So they couldn't find their artillery pieces, right? They couldn't find Georgian artillery pieces. Now, they had no UAV reconnaissance drones, all right? And this is going to make increased vulnerability, especially to guerrilla attacks that depend upon concealment, cover in the forest or whatever, right? Or urban cover. This doesn't bode well for a proxy war, which is going to use heavy reliance upon guerrilla tactics. Army elements had no means of reconnaissance and no effective communication with those who had access, right? So a lot of Army units were blind. No SATCOMs. As I recall reading, they had to rely upon cell phones for communications. Failure of command and control, right? Again, this increases vulnerability to guerrilla hit-and-run attacks. And in a proxy war with the West will utilize guerrilla tactics. Right? No doubt, the best trainers will be special forces units going in there, training the indigenous forces, resistance forces. If Russia were to invade, they would train the resistance forces, the insurgent forces in guerrilla tactics, provide weapons suitable for guerrilla tactics, hit and run, attacking convoys, attacking their lines of communication, right? Cutting off supply, and just creating a nightmare for the Russians. All right. And they would give all sorts of support, not just the weapons. They would give intel, right? And they would give, no doubt they would give, encrypted satellite communications equipment. All right. So, poor communications, no coordinated air support. They had few smart guided weapons, laser or optical or GPS. Lack of indirect targeting, direct sight only, imprecise targeting. They used iron bombs, dumb bombs, like World War II, causing, a lot of collateral damage. And they had at least 6 aircraft losses, 4 of which were believed to be due to friendly fire. I mean, you're losing more aircraft due to friendly fire, and that was attributed in part due to a dysfunctional IFF system. That's identification friend or foe. That's a system which can identify your aircraft as being either enemy or friendly, right? Now, they may have had as many as 8 air losses. There was poor training of professional corps soldiers, and none of the conscripts were used, right? So they used their best, and these guys were poorly trained. Their professional corps soldiers is only about 25% of their manpower. The greater bulk, 75%, are conscripts, most of which are 1-year conscripts. And these guys would fare far worse with only 1-year enlistments. They'd be incompetent, low morale, poor discipline, and I'll talk more about Russian force structure below. Right? I'll give you more details of how crappy this is. And then they had logistics failure. Their vehicle fleet was notoriously prone to breakdown. Plenty of breakdowns on the way to battle, and units ran out of ammunition. And this is compounded by diverse models of vehicles, diverse tanks, diverse transports, infantry fighting vehicles. This results in a repair parts nightmare. They had logistical problems keeping their logistical system running, and it created an inability to sustain major combat over a prolonged time and distance, especially with battle damage, right? So, I mean, this doesn't bode well with the whole idea that Russia's going to invade a European country. I mean, think of invading Ukraine right next to it. I mean, why? Why bother with its crap economy? But let's say they did, right? Ukraine's a big country. That's a lot of territory to conquer and occupy. That's going to be long supply lines to maintain those forces, making them vulnerable to be cut, right? And they have a crap logistical system. Trucks breaking down, right? Let alone, if they sustain, battle damage, right? All right. So they used old tanks, 1960s eras, T-62s and 72s, and they could not withstand Georgia anti-tank rockets. All that was required was RPGs, just like in Chechnya, right? Taking out the T-80s with RPGs. And the problem with these tanks is they have primitive gun sights, no night vision sights, ineffective gun range. So the T-72s have a range of 1,800 meters, M1 is over double that, 4,000 meters. All right. I mean, that's standoff range, right? That makes you Tony Volk. All you got to do is stand outside of 1,800. You can just pick these guys off, all right? You know, another thing is, I'm pretty sure 62s and 72s do not have powered turns. They have hand crank turns, just like in World War II. Anyways, okay. I mean, Russia has more modern tanks. They have the T-80s, and they have a few T-90s, several hundred T-90s, right? Which are basically just upgraded T-72s, and their command vehicles are falling apart. So as recently as the conflict in Syria, which is occurring now, 1970s hardware was still being used by Russian forces. Right? They're relying upon the old Soviet stuff. Right? So that tells you about the material readiness. These failures occurred with nearly 4 months to prepare. So this whole thing was kicked off by Putin, right, in April 16th. Right? Took a couple weeks to plan this. Right? Kicks it off by offering South Ossetia recognition of independence on April 16th. All right? And invaded on August 8th. That's nearly 4 months. So the Russian victory can be attributed to overwhelming numbers advantage, right? It was a poor performance, but they still won, right? And it's somewhat like Finland, their invasion of Finland in 1939. I mean, the running joke in that was that, you know, the Soviet Union defeated Finland by drowning the Finns in Russian blood. Right? The Russians got whacked so bad, but they eventually won. Right? Just in sheer numbers. So another thing was Georgian military ineptitude was even greater than Russia's. So I'll review this below, but here's my speculation on why they use T-62s, T-72s. I'm guessing this. This is just a guess. Right? Putin knows that the U.S. has satellites, right? And U.S. could, you know, share this information in Georgia. If they made a move to have a major shipment or movement of T-80s and T-90s, they had T-72s and T-62s right in the region, right? If they pulled in a big shipment through trains or whatever of T-80s, T-90s, well, you know, that would signal to the world that they're going to do something. That would signal to the world that they're planning something. They would signal to the world that they're setting this up. Right? Right? You know, and they wanted to make it look like Georgia did this by invading South Ossetia. Right? Well, they set the whole thing up by having, you know, with South Ossetia attacking Georgia, right? Georgia having to respond, and then they use that as a pretext to invade, and then Russia uses that to get a guarantee that Georgia does not join NATO. Then they back out. So after Russia fought ineffectively in 2 Chechen wars, losing the first, they again fought poorly in Georgian War, with glaring deficiencies, including poor air power ground support, failure of coordination and communication between forces, resulting in poor air support for ground forces and friendly fire incidents, you know, shooting down more of their own planes than the enemy shot down, failure of command and control, lack of intelligence and reconnaissance, lack of indirect sighting target capability for weapons, few guided weapons, poor training in Russia's professional military corps. All right, their best vehicle breakdown with severely limited repair ability, right, resulting in failure of logistical support. You know, and this is a short campaign. All right, think of a long, protracted campaign. How logistics can be cut. All broken down equipment and tanks. Alright, so this was Russia's pathetic military performance in its last 3 wars. The same would occur, and far worse, in a larger scale, protracted war in, let's say, Ukraine. It's a larger territory. You're going to have long supply lines that are vulnerable, right? It's going to be a proxy war with the West, and Russia's going to lose oil sales. They're going to lose gas sales. They're going to get whacked by economic sanctions. Right? There's going to be domestic political backlash. With all the Russian boys coming back dead in body bags, especially as the war drags on. You're going to get breakaway attempts in republics like Chechnya, right? And there's nothing worth taking. You're not going to get anything from this. So the whole idea of, this big scary threat of Russia invading, it's ridiculous. To get what? Nothing worth. And look at all the problems they're going to have. Look at all the losses they're going to have. All right? Look at all the military incapability. I mean, this is a joke across the board. I mean, if people can't retain this in their heads, right? And I swear, 99.99% of the population won't. Right? It's just, right? You can't fight a simple, stupid, joke or blurb in a social reality wave. All right, that dominates because people can handle that in their heads. All right. So my problem is I'm fighting against human capacity to retain this stuff and understand this stuff, and it's always tricky. All right, that's it for that.